So we're in. Morning, everybody. We are back in Sanhedrin. Yud Daled Amud Bet 14b, page 75 in the Steinsaltz, 14b little 3 in the art scroll. And we spent last shiur speaking about the halacha, or the halachot, of Orla and Neta Revai. Orla being the fruit which is not allowed to be eaten. The first 3 years produce of a newly planted sapling is not allowed to be eaten at all. And we postulated last time the reason for that. And in fact, when I read around, most of the answers that I read were pretty much what we already said last week, which it was about control, about not, and it was likened also to the idea of shiluach hakein, of sending away the mother bird, and like not taking the an animal away from its mother for the first 8 days. The idea being that, you know, if you've got fruit, don't be a chaza and just jump in and chap. You've got to show some self-control. That seems to be what most people learn from the mitzvah of Orla. Neta Revai, which is where our Mishnah talks about, is the 4th year produce. It's the year after the Orla, and what you had to do was to take that produce to Yerushalayim and eat it there. And the reason you had to take it to Yerushalayim and eat it there was because of the pasuk that we read, which said that it had to be eaten in holiness and as a praise to Hashem. And we explained last time that holiness meant you had to be pure, you had to be tahor, and hilulim l'Hashem, and the praise to Hashem meant that because you had a lot of it, you would hand it out to everybody else, and it would bring about shalom v'reyut, peace and harmony amongst people. That's what we said last time. Now, somebody asked at the end of the shiur last week, what about nowadays? What do we do with this 4th year produce nowadays? Because we don't take it to Jerusalem and eat it there. And why don't we take it to Jerusalem and eat it there? Any suggestions why we don't do that today?
No temple.
Yes, no temple, that is true. And because there is no temple, there is no para aduma, there's no red heifer, which means if there's no red heifer, there is no tahara, there's no purity. We're all ritually impure, despite the fact that we may or may not jump in the mikveh from time to time. We remain ritually impure. We are tamei until we're all tamei mate one way or another, until the Bet HaMikdash will be rebuilt and we'll have the para aduma. So we can't eat this neta revai in a state of purity. Now, so what do you do with it nowadays? Well, we will come to that shortly because it's tied up with what the Mishnah is telling us and the Gemarah is telling us. So let me share the screen with you for those of you who are not with us actually with a Gemarah in front of you. You should have your Gemarah there in front of you now on my screen. Okay, so the Mishnah said, Neta Ravai, the 4th year produce, Umase Sheni, She'ein Damav Yeduin, and the second tithe, whose value is not known, Bishlosha, takes 3. Takes 3 what? Well, we'll see a little bit later what the Mishnah is talking about. So Neta Ravai is the 4th year produce. We explained that in detail last week. Maaser Sheni. What is Maaser Sheni? What is Maaser Sheni? Please, anybody?
Is that for the Leviim?
No, not correct, Michael. That is Maaser Rishon. We have, when we have our produce, we have to take truma. Okay, truma. Truma goes to whom?
The Kohanim.
Correct, to the Kohanim. And you're allowed to choose which Kohen you give it to. Okay, so that's why Kohanim are usually very nice to people who are giving out Truma, because you can choose who to give it to. So Truma goes to the Kohen. Maaser Rishon, which is the first tithe, the first 10% tithe. How much is Truma, by the way? How much do you give for Truma?
10%.
No, not 10%, Julia. How much do you give for Truma? Michael, any idea?
5%?
No. David?
No.
1/24. 1/24 is Maaser, is Truma. Maaser Rishon is 10%, and is every year that's given to the Levi. Why do they Leviim get 10% and the Kohanim get less? They get just under. What do they get? They get just over 4%. Why?
Could it be a numbers game that there are a lot more Leviim than Kohanim?
Well, again, yes, that's possibly true, Michael. But again, you can choose which Levi you give it to. So, but yeah, okay, that's probably one reason. Yeah.
Do the Kohanim get it from other sources?
Say that again, Julia.
Do the Kohanim get Truma from other sources so that
they do? They do indeed. They get various other things. They get the portions of the korbanot that are brought. So when you bring a korban to the Bet HaMikdash, depending on which korban it is, the Kohanim get a portion of that, of many of the korbanot, which the Leviim do not get. So you're absolutely right, Julia. The Kohanim have a different, have additional sources of income, as it were, to the Leviim. The Leviim only live on their Maaser. Remember, the Leviim did not get an inheritance in the land. Every tribe was given a portion of the land. You'll remember, Johnny will remember our famous map of all the different tribal lands that we used very regularly in the Tanakh Shir. You won't see Levi on that map because they never got a land. What did they get instead? What was the tribe of Levi given?
Cities of refuge.
David?
Yeah, someone just said it.
To serve in the Bet HaMikdash.
They did get to serve in the Bet
Cities of
HaMikdash.
refuge.
Cities of refuge, correct. They got the Ari Miklot. They got the 6. Yeah. Some say 42 cities, actually, depending on the opinion you have. 6 are mentioned in the Torah by name, actually. But the Mefarshim say that there were there's some opinions that there were 42, but they didn't get a section of land to work the land. They had these cities here and there, so they did not have the opportunity to grow their own food, as it were. So it is up to the rest of us to give Maaser to the Levi. Now, this, I know this is not anything to do with our Gemarah, but since we mentioned Maaser Rishon, this was a rather, what's the word? Revolutionary idea at the time. For us, who are used to paying various taxes and income tax and what have you, this is nothing very revolutionary. But at the time, this was revolutionary, that a certain section of society would be public servants. That's what the Levium were. They were working in the Bet HaMikdash. They were working on behalf of Klal Yisrael. And they would be paid from the public purse by this Ma'aseh Rishon. So this is an idea, of course, which although we're used to it now, was not particularly commonplace at that time, and is the basis of the idea that we have, that we pay for public service, and that service, comes with responsibilities. Rights come with responsibilities. So that's Maaseh Rishon, but that's not what we're talking about. My question was, what is Maaseh Sheni? What is the second tithe? The second lot of 10% we had to give. Maaseh Sheni. What happens to who gets that?
Does it go to the Sanhedrin, or?
That would be a good guess, because that's also a public service. I never thought about how are the Sanhedrin paid. Don't know. Do we come to that in the Gemarah, David? Maybe. How are the Sanhedrin paid?
Don't remember. I can't remember it coming up. But who knows?
Interesting. They don't get Maaseh Sheni, that's for sure. But that's an interesting question. We'll have to look that up. Maaseh Sheni.
There's a paragraph I can't read it, on the top right of it's about Maaseh Sheni. About Maaseh Sheni.
Okay. That tells us how we're going to redeem it, but it doesn't tell us what it is. We have to go back.
No, further up, the top of the page. Sorry.
Over here. Right, there you go. Okay. Right, okay. So this tells you what to do with what Maaseh Sheni is. I'll read it out because it's probably said better than I will say it. The second tithe, Maaseh Sheni, is separated after Truma has been given to the priests, and after the first tithe, Maaseh Rishon, has been given to the Levites. That's what we've talked about. The second tithe is given in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the Shemitah cycle. How many years in the Shemitah cycle? 7, right? 7. So in the first, second, fourth, and fifth year, you take Maaseh Sheni. And it is very similar in its halachot to Neta Revai, to the fourth year fruits, which is why it's lumped together in our Mishnah. Because what you have to do to it is this: after the second tithe was removed, in other words, you've got whatever you've got left after you've given Truma and you've given Maaseh Rishon to the Levi, you then take 10%, and what you do with it, it was brought to Jerusalem to be eaten there by its owner. Exactly the same idea as the fourth year produce of fruit. Okay, now let's just stop there for the moment. Don't read on. Okay, don't read on in that section. So Maaseh Sheni was the second tithe, which is separated, taken to Jerusalem, and eaten there. Now, the same concept applies that we spoke about last week with Neta Revai. So you've got all this produce, you take it to Jerusalem, and you eat it in Jerusalem. Well, you can't eat 10% of your entire yearly produce in one trip to Jerusalem, you've got too much. So what you do is you spread it around, and then you bring peace and harmony and friendship to everybody around. So that's the idea of Maaseh Sheni. Now, you only do that in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years. So how many years are left after that?
3.
Which years are left, Johnny?
First, say again. Ask again, please.
1, 2, 4, and 5 are the Maaseh Sheni years. So what's
3,
left?
6, and 7.
3, 6, and 7. Okay, well, in 7, we don't do any tithes at all, do we? We don't take any tithes in year 7 because it's Shemitah. The year of Shemitah, you do not take tithes because you don't have any produce, because it's not yours. It's left for everybody. So we've got 2 years left now, year 3 and 6, where we do not take Maaser Sheni. What do we do in year 3 and 6? Michael, you have unmuted yourself, so I'm assuming you're going to tell me the answer.
Give it to the poor.
Yes, very good. It's exactly what you do. The Maaser Sheni is not taken in years 3 and 6. Instead, what you would have taken for Maaser Sheni, so that's the 10%, it's called Maaser Ani. Maaser Ani, the tithe for the poor. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. What are the poor meant to do in years 1, 2, 4, and 5? They don't get their tithe.
They have to glean.
They have to glean. They have to live off leket, shikacha, peah, and tzedakah. There is no limit on the amount of tzedakah you can give. There is also no limit on how big a corner you leave in your field. How do we know that? Because we said it this morning, didn't we?
So it's in the bracha, the Torah.
That's right, in Birchat Torah, which we discussed on Monday night.
Yeah, correct.
That's right. Eilu dvarim she'ein lahem shiur. These are the things that do not have any fixed amount. Peah is the first one. And as we said on Monday night, peah does not, in this situation, refer to a wig, a shekel. It refers to the corner of the field. So the answer to my question is they have to live off peah, shikha, leket, and tzedakah. But in years 3 and 6, we are obliged by law to give 10% of our produce to the poor. And that is the cycle of 7 years. So every year we give truma. No, not true. Every year except for the 7th year. Years 1 to 6, we give truma. Years 1 to 6, we give maaser rishon to the Levi. Years 1, 2, 4, and 5, we give Maaser Sheni. We separate Maaser Sheni. We take it to Jerusalem and we eat it there. Years 3 and 6, we give 10% to the poor. It's called Maaser Ani. Okay? And year 7, we don't give any tithes. All our produce is left open for anybody to take. So that's the agricultural cycle that we are meant to already know when we learn this Mishnah. Now, the reason that we learn so slowly in our shiur is that before we go on, we make sure we know exactly what we're talking about. So now we know what Neta Ravai is, and we know what Maaser Sheni is. One of the problems with learning Gemara, particularly when you learn Daf Yomi, is that you haven't got time to go and actually learn what these things are. So you're missing half of it. If you don't know what Neta Ravai is, how can it mean anything to you that you need 3 people to estimate it? It can't. So that's why we go so slow. This is a perfect example of why I think that the way we learn Gemara is the best way to learn it, because we're learning all sorts of other things on the back of it. So we now know what Neta Ravai is. We know what the 4th year produce is, and we know what Orla is. We know what Maaser Sheni is. Now, the Mishnah said, 4th year produce and Maaser Sheni, the 2nd tithe, she'ein damav yedu'in, where its value is not known. Bishlosha is somethinged by 3 judges. What do you think that something is? Julia, we can't hear you, but I can see your lips moving.
Well, the value is determined.
Why would you need to determine the value? You're taking it to Jerusalem. Who cares how valuable it is?
Well, I was wondering, actually, because I'm busy looking outside my window and I've got 2 fruit trees, actually, how you determine the tithe in the first place, because the fruits appear at different times of the year. I mean, within the same season, but they're not all together at one point in time.
Okay, but I think that you have, with each type of fruit, you have a sort of season, don't you? So right now, the grapefruits and the oranges are just coming into fruit now. They're just coming ripe. Within a couple of months, that crop will be finished. So,
well, I think you would need to value in order to determine that you are actually giving a full 10%.
Okay, so that's a fair answer. It's not actually what the Mishnah is talking about, but I think that's a fair answer. What you're saying is that that they don't have a system of self-reporting of income tax. In other words, what we do today with income tax is we tell the tax office how much we've earned, right? And then we say, okay, and then they tell us, well, you need to pay 40% or 50%, whatever it is, and this is how much you have to pay. But we self-report. What you're suggesting is that there are 3 judges that have to come to every tree and judge how much you've got to pay. In other words, how much is your 10%? I think it's a fair comment, but I don't think it's not what the Mishnah is talking about, and it's probably not practical.
It isn't in every case, obviously, but if they were to do it on an ad hoc basis.
You mean like Ofsted or something?
Exactly.
Like that, like the VAT inspector that comes and causes a nightmare. Yeah, could be. Okay, all those are very reasonable and logical answers, but they're not what the Mishnah is talking about. Any other suggestions what the Mishnah might be talking about?
Did the price fluctuate from year to year depending on other things? So they had to decide.
What difference does it make of the price, Avril, if you're going to take the fruit to Jerusalem?
But I thought they didn't always have to. Did they always have to take all the fruit itself, or could they translate it?
Now we're getting somewhere. Explain a little bit more, Avril.
Yes. So if they lived a long way from Jerusalem, they couldn't be expected to take the 10%, so they could place the monetary value on it. So obviously the judges needed to decide what the monetary value of it was in that particular.
Yes, exactly. It's called redemption, pidyon. I'm sure you've all heard of pidyon haben. Yes, the redemption of the firstborn son. And what has anybody made a pidyon haben for any of their children or grandchildren? Okay, Julia, explain to us what happens at a pidyon haben, please.
It was lovely, actually. It was for a grandson, and we did it outside in the garden when we in Liverpool. And as far as I recollect, well, the rabbi brought the money. He had his special coins, and the baby's put on a tray, and the special coins are. I think that we have to give I think we had to give the special coins back to the rabbi, and he gave us the baby back, although he's been a difficult child, but nevertheless, that's exactly what happens.
Okay, well, that's a fair description. It's not 100% accurate, but it's a fair
to Cohen, don't you?
Yes.
Cohen.
Yeah. If you substitute rabbi for Cohen, and you're pretty much there. So the idea of pidyon haben is that God says in the Torah that Kadesh li kol bechor, sanctify for me every firstborn. The firstborns belong to me. And what that meant was originally the firstborns were meant to be the people who served in the temple. The firstborns were sanctified to God, and they were God's people, if you like. They were God's servants. Now, because of the golden calf, the firstborns had that privilege taken away from them, and it was handed over to the Kohanim, because allegedly, Shevet Levi, the tribe of Levi, were the only tribe which did not get involved in the serving of the golden calf. And so therefore they were the only ones that were fitting to be God's servants, to do the service in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, and then the temple thereafter. So after the golden calf, the firstborns had that privilege removed from them. But the Torah still does tell us, Kadesh li kol b'chor, the firstborn belongs to me. Now, who, as it were, are God's representatives on earth? The Kohanim. The Kohanim, that's the Kohanim bless us when they duchen, don't they? And they're not blessing us. They are the conduit through which God blesses the people. Ko tevarechu et bnei Yisrael. This is how you should bless bnei Yisrael. Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, etc. And then, Johnny, because you're probably the only one that says this, at the end of that bit in Birchat HaTorah, after v'yasem lecha shalom, what do you add on, Nusach Sfard? I can't hear you, you're muted. You're muted, Johnny, unmute. Johnny, unmute.
Right, okay. Rebbeinu shalom.
No, you say, the Nusach Sfard says, how do we say? V'samoet shemi v'arvarachem. Place my name upon them, and I will bless them. That's the end of the psukim in after Yivarecha in Nusach Sfard. Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't say it. It says you begin with Kotavarach. Have you got your siddur there, Johnny?
I've got a siddur. Yep.
Have a look and see what it says. And it says, Avarachem, I will bless them. God, when the Kohanim duchen, they're not blessing us, they're passing on God's blessing. So the Kohanim are, as it were, God's representatives here on earth. And that's why when we give our bikurim, our first fruits and our korbanot, and we're giving them to God, we give them to the Kohanim, because the Kohanim are God's representatives. Same idea. So with your Pidyon Ben, that son, that firstborn son belongs to God. And since the Kohanim are God's representatives, then if we want that child back and we want to redeem the child from God, in other words, we want to replace what we're giving with something else. That's what a redemption is. I'm redeeming the child that I've given to God via these 5 coins that you spoke about, Julia. Okay, so that goes to the Kohen. The Kohen says in the service of the Pidyon Ben, the Kohen says, "What would you rather have? Would you rather what would you rather do? Would you rather give me this child, or would you rather give me these 5 coins, and I will give you the child back?" You don't get to answer that question again. You only get to answer that question at 30 days. So you can't change your mind 10 years later if it turns out to be a difficult child. But that's what you're asked. Do you want to redeem the child? And of course, the father says, I'd rather have the child. And the father gives the coins to the Kohen. So that father, by the way, has to own those coins, even though they're not his. The Kohen, who usually has these coins, he gives them to the father as a gift before the procedure. Because if he doesn't, then he's not actually making any kind of transaction, because the Kohen is buying him from him himself if he doesn't. So the idea is the Kohen gives the money to the father as a gift, or the father buys those coins off him with money, and then he uses those coins to buy the baby back, as it were, to redeem the baby. So why am I telling you all this in such detail? Because that is the concept of redemption. There is a concept in halacha of redeeming something against money. And Avril Links is absolutely right that there is a concept of redemption with this Ma'aseh Sheni and with Neta Ravai. If you imagine a successful farmer has to take 10% of his produce to Jerusalem, how on earth is he going to do that? He'll have, cartloads of the stuff. And then what's he going to do when he gets there? So there is a concept in halacha, you can redeem it. You can estimate the value. Let's say the value is 1,000 shekels. And you then say, you do a little bit of a ceremony and you say, this fruit is now redeemed onto this money. And the kedusha, the holiness of the fruit, is now transferred onto that money. So the fruit stops being holy, and then you can eat it wherever you want, wherever you live. And the money becomes holy. Okay? That money then becomes holy. So you then take the money to Jerusalem. It's holy money. You buy food in Jerusalem with that money and you eat it there. So it's a way of avoiding having to schlep all this produce from wherever you live down to Jerusalem. You redeem it onto money, bring the money to Jerusalem, spend the money in Jerusalem, which means that let's say you have a cheap produce. Let's say you have, I don't know, oranges, right, which are cheap. And you have a ton load of the stuff and you have it valued and it's worth 1,000 shekels. So you redeem it onto 1,000 shekels. You then go to Jerusalem with your 1,000 shekels and you can buy some very expensive commodity of 1,000 shekels worth of, I don't know, caviar, kosher caviar, right? Whatever it is. And so then you don't have a difficulty in eating all that produce. You can use that money for whatever you like, to use it for food and eat it in Jerusalem. So this idea of redeeming the produce, redeeming Maaseh Sheni, and redeeming Neta Ravai avoids the problem of having to schlep it to Jerusalem and avoids the problem of having too much cheap produce in Jerusalem. You can
only take a tenth. You only take a tenth of the 1,000 shekels.
No, if the tenth is whatever that tenth is worth.
Ah, yes, yeah.
Now, how do you know what that tenth is worth? Comes along the Mishnah and says you need 3 people to estimate the worth, exactly like Avril said earlier on. So now we can go back to our Mishnah and begin to understand what it's talking about. Neta Ravai. I'm over here on the screen here where my pointy is. Neta Ravai, the 4th year produce. Umaaseh Sheni, and second tithe. She'ein damav yeduin, whose value is not known. We'll come back to that in a moment. Whose value is not known. Bishlosha. You need 3 something or other. Probably judges. Because why do I say probably judges? Why am I guessing and say that 3 means judges? Yes, you're right, Julia. Go right back to the Mishnah. We're talking about judges, aren't we? The whole Mishnah is talking about how many judges you need for this, that, and the other. So clearly it means judges. Now, what type of judges? We'll come to that in a little while. Because remember, we just spent the last couple of weeks working out what type of judges were needed to measure this corpse that we were talking about last time. Right? And remember, what was his name? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov had this rather grandiose idea that he needed the king, the Kohen Gadol, and 71 judges from the Sanhedrin to go and do the measuring. So what type of judges is up for discussion? But clearly it means judges here. So it takes 3 judges to estimate the value of the produce that you are going to redeem. Now, that's what the Mishnah said. Okay, very straightforward so far, right? We now know what Neta Ravai is. We know what Maaseh Sheni is. We also know the halacha of being able to redeem it. And we now know that we need 3 judges to estimate the value. But what's this talking about? She'ein damav yeduin, that its value is not known. Surely all of
Surely the farmer would know how much it's worth.
Hold that thought, Johnny. Hold that thought, because that turns out to be important. My question is a little bit before that, and that is, what does it mean by whose value is not known? surely until you estimate it, all of it's not known. So the Gemara asks that question, and it brings us a brighter to answer the question. What does it mean? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, Eizehu ma'aseh sheni she'ein damav yudu'in. What is this ma'aseh sheni, which its value is not known? Answers the Gemara, Peirot shehir kivu. Fruit which has gone off. It's gone off. V'yayin shehikrim, and wine which has got a film on top of it. It's got like some kind of, it's not good stuff. It's not. Umaot shehechelidu. Who knows what chalud is in modern Hebrew? David, do you know what chalud is?
Yeah, what you get lots of when you live by the sea.
Correct. Rust. Yes, chalud is rust. You will, all of us, and maybe not Avril Links, because she doesn't live around here. She lives away from the seaside in Ramat Bet Shemesh. But don't you? Some of the time. Okay, well, anyway, if you were to live by the seaside like us, your water pipes will keep bursting like mine have. Since I've lived in this house, I've had 8 water pipe bursts in a period of 13 years. And the reason for that is because the pipes are rusty. And so that word is chalud. So ma'ot shehechelidu, rusty money. What's that talking about? Rusty money. What's rusty money? Well, the coins that they had have gone rusty, right? Our coins today are made out of stuff that don't rust. But back in the day, the coins would have had various metals in them which would have gone rusty. Now, once they go rusty, they lose their value. Same way as the fruit, once the fruit decomposes and goes off, it loses its value. And the wine, when it gets this sort of scum on it, loses its value. And the coins that have gone rusty. So the Gemara says, the Maaseh Sheni, the Netaravai, which we don't know the value of, the reason we don't know the value of it is because they've gone off. If they haven't gone off, then the value is obvious, because you know that you have, I don't know, let's say your 10% is 100 kilo, right? Your whole produce is 1,000 kilo of whatever it is. So you know that 10% is 100 kilo. You know you can go to the local shop and it's 10 shekels a kilo. You know what your value of your 10% is. You don't need 3 judges to come along and judge that. What you do need your 3 judges for is where you don't know the value. You can't go to your local shop, or maybe you can, it depends where you live. You can't go to your local shop and say, how much a kilo for moldy fruit? Right? You could do if you lived in certain areas where you've got lousy fruit shops, but most fruit shops don't sell you moldy fruit or gone off wine or don't value rusty coins. So you've still got a value to it, and its value might only be as animal fodder, or it might only be as compost, or whatever it is, it's got some value. So
it's like an assessor coming in for the insurance company to tell you how much your damaged stuff is worth.
Exactly, Johnny.
Yeah.
An assessor, in Hebrew, they're called a shammai, as in Beit Shammai. A shammai will come when you have God forbid, if you have any kind of insurance claim, they will send an assessor to see what the value of your stuff is. So you can't easily yourself find out the value of rotten fruit, gone off wine, or rusty coins. So the Gemara says, this is what the Mishnah is talking about. Maaseh Sheni she'ein damav yuduin. Maaseh Sheni, whose value is not known, needs to be estimated. And you need 3 estimators 3 judges. Now, up until now, we've been talking about judges in the legal sense of the word judge. Okay, judge, I suppose, with a capital J, right? Judges of the Sanhedrin. Remember, we were talking about the corpse case. They were judges of the Sanhedrin. There was a machloket, whether they were local judges, whether they were judges from the Sanhedrin, or as Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, all 71 of the Sanhedrin. So up until now, we've been talking about judges. So you would be excused for thinking that when it says bishlosha, which is exactly the same expression as previously, and in fact, exactly the same expression as our whole Mishnah began, our whole Gemarah shiur began, by the way, 3 years ago this week. It was actually last week, 3rd of November 2019, we started. And we started with the words, well, have a look at the name of this parak. What's it called? It's called Dinei Mamonot Bishlosha.
Yeah.
Monetary matters are judged by 3 judges. So when it says Bishlosha all the way through the Mishnah and all the way through the last 3 years, we've been talking about judges with a capital J. So you would be understood, you would be excused for believing that this shlosha also means judges with a capital J. But it does not. Have a look at the next piece of Gemarah. The next piece of Gemarah goes a bit further and says, Tanu Rabbanan. Oh, by the way, let's have a look at this little B here, talking about the wine that's developed a film. Rabbi Steinsaltz tells us a little bit of science here. Wine that has been attacked by bacteria goes sour, forming a grey film on its surface, the characteristics of which depend on the kind of bacteria involved. For this reason, wine that's gone sour in this way is called wine that has developed a film. Interesting. Okay, that's why it's called that. Right. So, where are we? Here we go. So, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught us, Maaseh Sheni, She'ein Damav Yeduin, Maaseh Sheni, second tithe, whose value we do not know. Hodin Oto. What word can you see in there? Hodin Oto.
Pidyon.
Pidyon, correct. We redeem it. We redeem it. Bishlosha lakochot. What is a lakoach in modern Hebrew?
It's a buyer.
Yes, a buyer, a customer, a customer. If you you may see signs in a shop. Lukuchot Yekarim, right?
Yeah.
Dear customers, Lukuchot are customers. So here it doesn't mean necessarily customers. He's translated it here as purchasers, okay, which is the same word, but it means buyers, as in people who know the price of things. So if you are a buyer with a capital B for one of the big stores, right? You might be a buyer for Tesco's or something. You will be somebody who goes to a manufacturer and negotiates a price. Right? Let's say you're a buyer for Tesco and you want to go and you're a buyer for pineapples, right? You will go to the pineapple growers and you will test the quality of their merchandise as a buyer, and you will negotiate a price with them. So therefore, a buyer here is not talking about a regular customer in the street that like you or me. It's talking about a buyer with a capital B, if you understand what I mean. So shlosha lekuchot, it means 3 people who are experienced at buying this kind of produce. So they will know what the going rate is or what they should be paying for a certain product. So we need 3 of them. So let's go back. Tana Rabbanan. Master Sheni Shanan David during Podin to be Shlosha Lakuchot. They taught that the second tithe, whose value is not known, can be redeemed by 3 purchasers. And Rav Steinsaltz explains to us what I've just said, i.e., experts in trade. Aval lo bishlosha she'ein lakochot, but not by 3 ordinary folk, ordinary purchasers like you or me that are not experts in the field. So it's very clear what he's talking about. Now, this is interesting. The Gemarah goes further and says they have to be 3 experts. You have to get 3 people who know the value of these products, and presumably they'll each give their value, and then you'll take an average of the 3. That's how I imagine it works. And then he goes on to say this: Afilu nochri echad mehen. Even if one of these buyers, these expert traders, is not Jewish. So it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or not. Their criteria for being a judge in this case is not your Jewish status or your Jewish knowledge, which is why I was at pains to point out to you that if you thought it was judges with a capital J, like all the other cases we've had, you would be wrong. Because, of course, you cannot have a non-Jewish judge judging halachic cases, judging halakha. What you can do is bring in a non-Jewish expert in the field that you need expertise. So even if the judge, one of these buyers, is not Jewish, now this is interesting. And I would have thought that this would not be allowed today. And I'm surprised to see it here in the Gemarah, and I wonder whether it is actually the halacha. Afilu echad mehem ba'alim. Even if one of these 3 expert traders happens to be the owner of the produce. Now, that to me sounds like a bit of a conflict of interest. It's clearly in my interest to give a low price for this produce if I'm the owner, because I'm going to be redeeming it and taking it to Jerusalem and spending my money there. And I'm going to want to do that, since I'm going to have to give most of it away to other people, as we've already explained. I'm probably, if I'm a normal human being, going to want to do that to the least amount. So there's probably a conflict of interest there. And that's why the Gemarah says, Afilu echad mehem ba'alim, because you might have thought that because of the conflict of interest, one of the owners cannot be one of the 3. In the same way as you might have thought one of the 3 is not Jewish, it doesn't count. It does. And that's why it goes on to tell you that. Yes, Johnny?
I'll shock you even further. If you read Rabbi Steinsaltz, the bottom right said, a man and his 2 wives can be judges.
Yeah.
2 wives.
I'll tell you a story about that. That comes on in the next bits. That's in the next bit of Gemarah about 3 partners. And so we'll come back to that probably next week now. There's certainly questions to be asked about conflict of interest here. So,
but Johnny, couldn't you argue the same for regular Maser Sheni that wasn't spoiled, that the owner would have a vested interest in valuing that Maser Sheni as low as possible, as he's not going to get the full benefit from it?
You're right. You're absolutely right, David. That's the, I suppose, the danger of self-reporting, isn't it?
Mm.
So what you're saying is, and it's a very fair point, that there should be no difference. It's a kal v'chomer, really, what you're saying. Because here, at least, there are 2 other judges who are not got a vested interest, who've not got a conflict of interest. So your argument, which is a very powerful argument, says if in regular Maaser Sheni there doesn't need to be an independent valuer, the owner himself is the only one that values it, certainly it can't be a problem if he's one of three that values it if it's gone off. I suppose my counter argument, if I wanted to be difficult, which I don't particularly, but it's just popped into my head. I think the point you make is a very good point. I suppose what I would say is what I said a bit earlier on, that the value of non-spoiled fruit is really a known item. You can go very easily. Anybody can go easily to the shops and find that out. It's a fact which is very easily ascertainable. Whereas the gone off stuff is not, because it's not generally speaking available in the shops. So I suppose I don't think it's a particularly good answer. I think your question's better than the answer, but it is an answer. But the point that you make is very fair, and I suppose what we're saying is, in the fact that they can do it themselves, is that at the end of the day, Kodesh Baruch Hu knows what you're doing. If you're trying tricks, you're trying tricks. I mean, nothing's changed. Ein chadash tachat hashemesh. We all know, don't we? So-called religious people who don't behave in a religious manner, and we think, well, what's the point of all that? Kodesh Baruch Hu knows what you're up to. And I suppose that's the same point.
Johnny, sorry, David, carry on. I was going to say, if all the produce is damaged, do you still have to pay a tithe? Yeah, because it's got value. If it's valued, at absolutely zero, in other words, it's so bad it can't even be used for compost. I don't know if that's ever possible, but if it's so bad, I don't know, let's say it became radioactively contaminated and it couldn't be used for anything at all, well, then its value is zero, and 10% of zero is zero. But anything that's got a value, it would have to be 10% of that value, however low the value is. Yeah, David, you wanted to...
correct me if I'm wrong. When it comes to people selling produce, and there's concern about demai, i.e. produce that tithes haven't been taken from, we rely on a concept of chaver, that someone is automatically is considered honest when it comes to selling produce. Could one make the same assumptions with Maaser?
Okay, so let's just
declaration.
Just correct one little point there. Demai is not produce that hasn't had Maaser taken from. That's called tevel. Demai is produce where there's a safek. We don't know whether it's been taken or not.
Correct.
And that's the point that you were making there, is that if we don't know whether it's been taken or not, there is a concept of, I suppose you'd call it chezkat kashrut. You assume that the person that's given it you is an honest, Torah observant Jew, and that he has taken. Now, the question is whether that's a reasonable assumption. And I'm not so sure we should get into that discussion. But yes, there is the concept of cheskat kashrut in that regard. And I suppose that's what we would be saying here as well, isn't it? That we should not assume that people are dishonest. We should, if we are following the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, where we're told that I think it was Rabbi Eliezer who says that the midah tova that one should have is an ayin tova, a good eye. In other words, you should always done lekaf zechut. You should always judge people favorably, and we should not be cynical and assume that people would be doing the wrong thing. Julia is grinning from ear to ear because she understands exactly what we're talking about here. And some would say that's naive. Others would say that's utopian. But it's probably something that those people that act in that way, who do assume that people are honest and that most people are good, probably have happier lives than those who see demons at every corner. They may sometimes be disappointed and fall flat on their face, granted, but on the whole, I think they probably lead more happy lives than the total and utter cynic who assumes that everybody is out to get them. I have a relative who thinks that absolutely everybody in the world is out to get them, and they are just basically unhappy people because they're just looking around the corner for where the catch is, at all times. So yeah, I think that's probably a fair point, David, that we can assume that Chesed Castro. It's very interesting here. Maybe I'm one of those cynics, because as soon as I saw that vested interest, I thought that that's a problem. So maybe I need to hone up my ayin tova a bit.
A more fundamental question is that this is obviously the exception to the rule, which I had never considered before, that it's the one case, or maybe there's one other, in the whole of this very long Mishnah that's not talking about judges, professional judges. It's talking about analysts making a value of something. What's this case doing in the Mishnah?
It's a good question, and I think that it's in there for one reason only, and it's because it's bishlosha. And you have to remember that the Mishnah was not initially written down. Well, it was written down. Of course, it was written down. It was not initially printed in numerous copies. All right, well, before the printing press, they had to be written out by manuscripts. Manuscripts were very rare and expensive. So, how was the Mishnah learned and passed on? By mouth, ba'al peh. Okay, so you had to find a way to remember these things. So the way you did it was by what we used to call mnemonics, sort of mnemonics. You group things together to enable you to remember them. So I think that the reason this is in there is because it's bishlosha, and it's lumped together with all the bishloshas, so that when you're trying to remember this Mishnah, in your, if you went to, do you go to Pirchim when you were little, David? I went to. Did you go, Johnny?
Aguda on Northumberland Street.
Yeah, did you used to go when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Pirchei Aguda, Pirchim comes from the word perach, flower. Pirchei Aguda were the kids. It was a kids group, a bit like Bnei Akiva, except not like Bnei Akiva, right? It was a kids group, and you went there, and the whole raison d'etre of Pirchim was for the Pirchim Siyum once a year, at which the clever clogs would come up there and say off by heart zillions of Mishnayos, and whoever said the most of them correctly off by heart won the prize. Okay, I never got past about 10 because I got bored with it all. But there were kids there. I'm talking kids of 7, 8, 9 years old who learned hundreds, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Mishnayos off by heart. Whether they understood them or not is another story, but they knew them off by heart. And the reason that they did this was because, of course, the Pirchei Aguda was still living in the pre-printing press age, where people had to learn things off by heart to know them. So they have placed very, very great emphasis on learning stuff off by heart. You read it when you read the biographies of the Gedolim, right? You read that they knew the whole of Shas Baal Peh by the age of 3, right? Why is that such an important thing? Because people didn't have a Shas. You don't need to learn Shas off by heart anymore. You don't even need to own a Shas. You just need to go onto Sefaria, which is free. So the whole world has changed, but not for Pirchim. They still teach their kids billions of Mishnayos off by heart. So I think the answer to your question, David, is it's in there because it was grouped in there to make learning it off by heart simple. Now, I may be completely wrong, but that is my opinion, and until I hear a better reason, I'm sticking with it. Okay, as usual, we have run out of time way before I've got through all the stuff that I wanted to, but let's just summarize what we've said today. We've explained the cycle of Maaser, that in years 1, 2, 4, and 5, we have to take the second tithe, which is for us, but we have to take it to Jerusalem and eat it. We learned that in year 3 and 6, that tithe is not taken and it's given to the poor. It's called Maaser Ani. What else did we learn? We don't do any tithes in Shemitah. They have to, everything is Hefker. We then learned that you make your own estimation of what your value is unless it's gone off. And if it's gone off, you can't easily estimate. So the Gemara says, if it's gone off, either it's wine that's gone moldy, or it's fruit that's rotting, or the coins have gone rusty, then you have to get 3 judges to estimate its value. What kind of judges are we talking about? We're talking about experts in the field, expert buyers with a capital B, who know the value of these products. And we learned that they are experts for their expertise in that field, not because of their halachic expertise. Proof of that is it can even be a non-Jew. And we also learned that we rely on people to be honest, and that they have kashrut, and that even if one of the people who we use to estimate are the owners, that the Gemara is okay. We're going to go even further next week, and we're going to see that, as Johnny gave us a spoiler, that you can even be your 2 wives getting involved. But we'll talk about that in detail next week. Any questions about what we have learned this week? Yes, David.
Sorry, just one more thing. Could you confirm for me that Teruma and Maaser Rishon don't have to be given in Yerushalayim?
They don't have to be given in Shuraim, correct. They do have to be eaten in Tahara by the recipient. So your Kohen who eats it, and your Levi who eats it, it has to be eaten in Tahara, but they don't have to be in Yerushalayim.
Thank you.
Nowadays, of course, we don't give it to the Kohanim. And so what I will do next week, please God, is I will answer the question from the end of last week's shiur, is what we do with Neta Ravai today, because we can't eat it because we're not in Tahara. And the answer is the same thing that happens with Truma and Maaser, but we'll go into that of how you redeem it today. We're still talking about how it was redeemed back in the day of the Beit HaMikdash. When we've finished going through how it was redeemed in the Beit HaMikdash, we will go on to how it's redeemed in today's day. And it's important, especially for Julia, who has fruit trees in her garden. She has to know what to do with her Neta Ravai and her Maaser Sheni. And we all need to know what to do with our Truma and Maaser if we have fruit trees. I have a lot of fruit trees in my garden, Baruch Hashem. And I'll tell you what we do with it probably next week, if we get to it. Might be the week after. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Please God, see you next week.
Thank you.
Before.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Ta-ta.